Okay, I want you to imagine something for a second. It's late. It's January 27th, 1956. You're sitting in your kitchen in Montgomery, Alabama.
You're 27 years old.
Right, 27. You've got a cup of coffee that's gone cold, and the phone rings. You pick it up, maybe thinking it's a friend, a church member.
But it's not. The voice on the other end is cold. It's dripping with hate.
And it tells you that you're going to die. Not just you. It tells you they're going to blow up your house.
Where your wife and your infant daughter are asleep.
Exactly. I mean, for almost anyone, that's the breaking point. The rational response is just pure terror.
You'd panic. You'd pack a bag, grab your family, and get on the first train out of there. And honestly, no one would blame you.
No one. But this 27-year-old man, he doesn't pack. He doesn't even wake his wife. He just hangs up the phone, puts his head in his hands.
And he said later that right there in his kitchen, paralyzed by fear, he had this profound spiritual revelation, a voice telling him to stand up for righteousness.
So he stays. And just 3 days later, the threat becomes real. His house is bombed. The front porch is just shattered.
And this is where the story gets really incredible. The community hears the blast. An angry mob of his supporters gathers outside.
And they are ready to go. They've got knives, guns, rocks. They are about to burn Montgomery to the ground in retaliation.
The powder keg, right.
Absolutely. And this young man, he walks out onto the ruins of his porch, raises his hand, and tells them to put their weapons away, to go home. He preaches peace to a mob that wants blood.
And that moment, that really encapsulates the man we're looking at today. We are, of course, talking about Martin here.
Right. But the goal of this deep dive isn't just to, polish the icon on the monument. We're not here to just recite, I have a dream and feel good.
No. We want to look at the strategist, the tactician, the man who had to navigate these terrifying failures and, frankly, play 4D political chess with 3 different U.S. presidents.
That's the mission. We're pulling from a documentary transcript called Martin Luther King Jr., The Dream That Changed America, and a whole stack of historical analysis. And what jumps out is that this was not a straight line. It wasn't inevitable.
It was messy, it was calculated, and it was incredibly dangerous. We need to unpack how this Baptist minister evolved his philosophy, drawing on his father, on Gandhi.
And how he learned to use nonviolence as a weapon.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't always successful. We have to talk about the stumbles, like in Albany, Georgia.
Oh, for sure. Because those failures were actually what set for the massive victory in Selma.
And then there's the politics. You've got Eisenhower, JFK, LBJ King is maneuvering between these giants who a lot of the time just wished he'd go away.
So let's go back to the beginning, because even his name is a story. I actually didn't realize this, but he wasn't born Martin Luther.
No, he wasn't. He was born Michael King Jr.
Right. January 15, 1929. And the name change happens in 1934. And it's this detail that just sets the stage.
So his father, Reverend Michael King Sr., he goes on this trip to Berlin.
He does, for a Baptist Woodland Alliance meeting. And you have to remember the context here. It's 1934 in Berlin.
So he's witnessing the rise of Nazism.
Firsthand. He's seeing the swastikas, the hatred bubbling up against Jewish businesses, this atmosphere of just pure intolerance. But at the same time, he's in the land of the Protestant Reformation. He's visiting sites connected to Martin Luther.
The reformer who nailed the 95 Theses to the church door, the man who challenged the entire power structure.
Exact. So King Sr. is seeing this incredible duality, the worst of humanity in Hitler, and the legacy of a man who changed the world with faith and protest. And it had such a profound effect on him that when he got back to Atlanta, he changed his own name to Martin Luther King.
His 5-year-old son's name, too.
So you imagine, it's like branding your kindergartner with the legacy of a revolutionary reformer before he can even tie his...
Talk about pressure. And he's growing up in Sweet Auburn in Atlanta, which was a pretty middle-class black neighborhood.
Yeah, it's important to note he wasn't poor. He grew up with books, with an education, but you couldn't escape Jim Crow, not even in Sweet Auburn.
The source material really points to these specific moments that chipped away at him, like the best friend.
Oh, that's a heartbreaking one. He had a white friend who lived across the street. They were inseparable, but the minute they started schools, segregated schools, of course, it stopped.
The friend's parents cut it off.
They told him to his face that he couldn't play with their son anymore just because he was black. For a 6-year-old, that's not politics. It's just this deeply personal...
And his parents had...
They did. They explained the history of slavery and discrimination, but they also drilled into him that Christian idea of love thy neighbor. So right away, he's got this conflict, right? This burning anger versus the command to love the people who are hurting.
And he saw that defiance modeled by his father. The story of the shoe shop.
Yeah, King Sr. takes young Martin to buy shoes. They sit down in the front seat. Clerk comes over and says, you have to move to the back.
And King Sr. doesn't scream. He doesn't make a scene.
No, he just says, I'll buy shoes sitting here or I won't buy shoes at all. He takes his son and walks out. That sense of dignity, of refusing to accept the premise of your own inferiority, that was huge.
But the moment King himself said was the angriest I've ever been in my life, that happened when he was 13.
He was on a bus, coming back from a debate competition, which, by the way, he had won.
He's with his teacher, the bus gets crowded, and the driver orders them to stand up just so a white man could sit down.
And in Georgia at that time, you didn't have a choice. Refusing meant arrest, or worse, so they stood for 90 miles. He said that night he vowed he would hate all white.
That anger is so important to acknowledge. I think we sometimes sanitize him, turn him into this placid saint. But the fire was absolutely there.
Oh, the rage was there. The genius was in how he learned to channel it. He was a brilliant kid reciting Bible verses at 5, reading dictionaries just to learn big words. He started at Morehouse College when he was only 15.
And there's another key moment during his education. He takes a summer job on a tobacco farm in Connecticut.
Right, and for the first time in his life, he's out of the Jim Crow South.
And the rules are just different.
They're completely different. He writes these letters home just amazed. He can eat in any restaurant. He can sit anywhere he wants on the train. He goes to a church and sees black and white people worship together. He experienced what a non-segregated society actually felt like.
It wasn't just an idea anymore. It was a memory.
Exactly, which must have made the train ride back just devastating. The moment he crosses that line back into the South in DC, the conductor comes and tells him he has to move to the colored car behind a curtain. That physical act of being put back in the box, that solidified a thing for him.
So from Morehouse, he goes to Crozer Seminary in Pennsylvania. And this is where the intellectual piece really clicks into place.
This is where he discovers Gandhi.
Right.
He reads everything he can. He buys like half a dozen books. And he becomes captivated by this idea of satyagraha, which means soul force. He realizes nonviolence isn't passive. It's not weak.
It's a tool. It's a weapon system.
It's a form of confrontation, a way to fight an unjust system without becoming unjust yourself. And that becomes the core of his philosophy.
Which brings him to Boston University for his PhD and, more importantly, to meeting Coretta Scott.
And their meeting is, I have to say, pretty funny. It shows this other side of him.
He was not subtle.
Not at all. He gets her number, calls her up, and on their very first date, he essentially lays out his criteria for a wife. He tells her she has the 4 qualities he's looking for: character, intelligence, personality.
I mean, talk about direct. Here's my checklist. You pass. Let's do this.
And Coretta was actually pretty hesitant. She was studying at the New England Conservatory of Music. She wanted to be a concert singer.
And she knew marrying a Baptist minister meant giving that up.
It meant becoming a preacher's wife. But he was persuasive. They got married in 1953, and by 1954, he's the new pastor at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery.
Putting him in exactly the right place at exactly the right time for the spark, December 1st, 1955.
Rosa Parks, she refuses to give up her seat. Now, a lot of people think of this as just a spontaneous act, a tired seamstress.
But she was a trained activist, right?
Yeah.
Secretary of the local NAACP.
She knew what she was doing. When she was arrested, E.D. Nixon, the head of the NAA chapter, immediately called.
But why him? He was the new guy in town. He was only 26.
That was the point. He hadn't been there long enough to make enemies or get caught up in the local politics. He was a fresh face with this incredible voice. But the source material clear. King was scared.
He thought it would fail.
He was terrified. He was worried about KKK retaliation, of course, but also just the logistics. How do you get 40,000 black citizens to work every day without using the bus?
It's a monumental undertaking. People have to work to eat.
Exactly. But the first morning of the boycott, King gets up early. He pulls back his curtains to watch first bus of the day go by. And it's
wow.
And the next one is empty. And the one after that. The community had rallied. They formed the Montgomery Improvement Association, the MIA, and they settled in for the long haul.
And this is where the strategy becomes so brilliant and so granular. They organized this massive carpool.
But the city fought back dirty. They pressured insurance companies to cancel the policies on any car being used in the carpool.
So what did King do?
He got Lloyd's of London to insure them. Then the police started arresting drivers for trumped-up traffic violations. King himself got arrested for going 30 in a 25.
Just pure harassment.
Total harassment. But while they were fighting that battle on the streets, the MIA was also attacking in the court. They bypassed the hostile state courts and filed a federal lawsuit. So it was a two-pronged attack.
And they held the line for 381 days.
Over a year! Think about that. And in December 1956, the Supreme Court ruled that segregation on buses was unconstitutional. It was a complete and total victory.
And it proved that this soul force, this strategy, could actually work. It could break the back of Jim Crow.
It was the proof of concept, and it led to the formation of the Southern Christian Leadership Council, the SCLC, to try and replicate this success across the South.
Okay, let's jump forward a few years to the 1960 presidential election. This is where King, maybe unintentionally, becomes a kingmaker.
It's a fascinating moment. October 1960, King joins a student sit-in at a restaurant and he gets arrested for trespass.
Which would normally be a minor thing. Pay a fine, get released.
But he was still on probation for that minor traffic offense from Montgomery driving with an out-of-state license. And the judge in Atlanta decides to weaponize.
He throws the book at him.
He sentences Martin Luther King Jr. to 4 months of hard labor in a Georgia state penitentiary.
Hard labor for a sit-in and a traffic ticket.
Which was effectively a potential death. A prominent black activist on a Georgia chain gang in 19... The chances of him trying to escape and getting shot were incredibly high.
Coretta must have been terrified.
She was 6 months pregnant. She was sure she'd never see him alive again. And all this is happening in the final weeks of a razor-thin presidential election between Richard Nixon and John F.
And the black vote was, at that time, still somewhat up for grab. Historically, it leaned Republican.
The party of Lincoln, right. King's own father was a Republican. So Nixon's campaign gets wind of this. Nixon actually knew King, but he makes a calculation.
He's worried about alienating white Southern voters.
So he does nothing. He stays silent. He ghosts him.
But the Kennedys see an opening.
JFK makes a very simple human gesture. He calls Coretta directly just to express his sympathy. But then his brother, Robert Kennedy, who is the campaign manager
and the enforcer,
he calls the judge in Georgia direct, and he is furious. He basically yells at the judge that it's illegal to deny bail for a misdemeanor.
Yes, strong-armed.
Completely. The judge buckled, King was released, and the news of that phone call spread like wildfire through the black community.
King's father famously said he had a suitcase full of votes he was going to deliver to Kennedy.
And he did. JFK won the black vote by a massive margin, and that margin very likely won him the presidency.
So now we're in the Kennedy years. And things are really heating up. 1961, the Freedom Riders. The violence is escalating to a whole new level.
Yeah, the Freedom Riders were testing federal laws about interstate travel, interracial groups riding buses into the Deep South, and they were met with just unbelievable brutality. Buses firebombed, people beaten with pipe.
And King flies to Montgomery to support them at a church rally.
And this scene is just... it's pure chaos. A mob of thousands of white supremacists surrounds the church. They're throwing bricks, Molotov cocktails. They're trying to burn it down with everyone inside.
And the people inside are trapped.
They're trapped. The U.S. Marshals that Robert Kennedy sent try to use tear gas, but the wind blows it back into the church. So now everyone is choking.
And King has to make a call.
He gets RFK on the phone personally, and he tells him, "We are going to die in here if you don't do." The National Guard is finally mobilized to disperse the mob, but it just shows how close to the edge they were.
But not every campaign was a win like Montgomery. We have to talk about Albany, Georgia in 1961. This is largely seen as a failure for the movement.
It was a failure, and understanding why it failed is so important to understanding King's evolving strategy.
The police chief there, Laurie Pritchett, he had done his homework.
He was smart. He had studied King's tactics in Montgomery, and he understood that King's strategy relied on creating what he called creative tension. It relied on drama.
He needed the police to be brutal. He needed those images of clubs and blood to shame the nation into action.
So Pritchett decided not to give. He ordered his officer to be nonviolent. He made mass arrests, but he did it peacefully. He had arranged for jails in the surrounding counties to be ready. So his jail never filled up, diffused the whole...
So when King and his lieutenant, Ralph Abernathy, tried to force the issue by choosing to stay in...
The city played this brilliant, cynical trick. A well-dressed Negro who was secretly being paid by the mayor, showed up and anonymously paid their fine.
So they got kicked out of jail.
Exactly. King was furious. He said it was the first time he'd ever been. But without the confrontation, the media got bored and left. The movement lost all its momentum. They left Albany with almost nothing to show for it.
It was a hard lesson. Nonviolence needs a villain. If the other side doesn't play the part, the whole narrative collapses.
That's it. So for their next major campaign in 1963, they went looking for the biggest, meanest villain they could find, and they found him in Birmingham, Alabama.
Eugene Bull Connor,
the public safety commissioner, a man who practically boasted about his brutality. Birmingham was known as Bombingham for the number of unsolved bombings of black homes and churches.
So King and the SCLC launched Project C.
C for confrontation. The entire goal was to bait Bull Connor into overreacting on camera, to expose the sheer ugliness of segregation to the world.
It sounds cynical to bait someone into violence.
It was. But it was also a desperate tactical necessity. They had to make the invisible violence of the system visible to everyone.
So the protests start, and King is arrested on Good Friday, put in solitary confinement. This is when he writes the letter from Birmingham jail.
On scraps of newspaper, on the margins of toilet paper, anything he could find. He's responding to a group of white clergymen who had called his protests unwise and untimely, and he just dismantles their argument about waiting. He writes that justice too long delayed is justice denied. It's just a mess.
But on the ground, the movement was running out of steam again. Adults were afraid to march. They'd lose their jobs, their homes.
So they make an incredibly controversial decision. One of King's aides, James Bevel, suggests using children.
Wow. King must have been hesitant.
He was. Sending high schoolers, even elementary school kids, to face Bull Connor's force. It was a massive risk. But he felt they had no other cards to play.
So on May 2nd, over 1,000 children skipped school and marched downtown.
And they're arrested in droves. They're singing freedom songs as they're loaded into paddy wagons and then into school buses because the jails are overflowing.
And then the next day, May 3rd, the turning.
Bull Connor just loses his mind. He sees more kids marching, and he orders the fire department to turn the high-pressure hoses on them.
And these weren't garden hoses.
These are monitor guns that constrict the bark off a tree. They're knocking kids off their feet, tumbling them down the street like rag dolls. And then he brings out the police dog.
And the photographers were there for all of it.
That was the key. Those photos hit the front page of every newspaper in the world. A police dog lunging at a young boy. Children huddled together against the blast from a fire hose. It was undeniable.
It forced President Kennedy's hand.
He couldn't stay on the sidelines anymore. The Soviet Union was using these pictures as propaganda, mocking American freedom. Kennedy went on national television, called civil rights a moral issue, and finally introduced a comprehensive civil rights bill. Birmingham was the victory.
Which leads us directly to the high water mark of the movement, August 1963, the March on Washington.
An incredible day. They were hoping for 100,000. 250,000 showed up. Just a sea of humanity, black and white, standing together.
And King's speech. We all know the famous part. But the source notes that he started off reading from a prepared text. It was a good speech, but it wasn't transcendent.
And then the great gospel singer, Mahalia Jackson, who was sitting near him on the stage, she shouted out,
"Tell him about the dream, Martin."
And he did. He had used that "I have a dream" riff in other speeches before. He pushed the prepared text aside, and just that shift from a formal speech to an improvised sermon is what made it one of the greatest speeches in America.
But history moves so fast. A few months later, in November, JFK is assassinated.
And Lyndon B. Johnson. And to his credit, LBJ, the old Southern political operator, he uses the nation's grief over Kennedy as leverage to ram the Civil Rights Act Congress in 19...
A landmark piece of legislation. It outlawed segregation in all public.
It was the legal death of Jim Crow. And that same year, King wins the Nobel Peace Prize, and he donates the entire prize money, over $50,000, to the movement.
But there was still a huge piece of the puzzle missing, the right to vote. The South still had all these tricks, poll taxes, literacy tests to keep black people off the rolls.
So in 1965, the focus shifts to Selma, Alabama, and this leads to Bloody Sunday.
Interestingly, King wasn't actually there for that first march.
No, he was in Atlanta. A young John Lewis led the marchers. And as they tried to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge, they were brutally attacked by state troopers, beaten with clubs, tear gassed.
And it was all caught on camera.
It interrupted the Sunday night movie on national TV. Suddenly, families across America were watching this Nazi-level brutality happening in their own country.
King rushed back to Selma, and President Johnson finally acts. He goes before Congress and gives this incredible speech.
He adopts the movement's anthem. He says, "And we shall overcome." It was a stunning moment. With federal protection, they finally complete the march to Montgomery.
A huge triumph, but again, it came at a cost.
A terrible cost. Viola Liuzzo, a white mother of 5 from Detroit who had come down to help, was driving protesters back to Selma. A car full of Klansmen chased her down and shot and killed her. It's just a constant reminder that every single victory was paid for in blood.
And as we get into the late 60s, the whole dynamic starts to change. The movement begins to fracture.
It does. You have the rise in the Black Power movement. Figures like Stokely Carmichael, a younger generation of activists who are tired of nonviolence. They're tired of being beaten and not fighting back.
They start talking about self-defense.
Right. And you have riots breaking out in cities like Watts and Detroit. The whole landscape. And the source says King felt this. He fell into a depression.
He felt like his message was being lost.
He was being squeezed. The white establishment thought he was moving too fast, and the young black militants thought he was moving too slow. The Senate even rejected a fair housing bill, blaming extremists on both sides.
So he pivots. He starts to focus more on economic justice.
Exactly. He launches the Poor People's Campaign. He realizes that legal rights are meaningless without economic opportunity. He wanted to unite poor people of all races, black, white, Latino, Native American, to demand a better deal.
Which in a way was even more radical and threatening to the establishment.
Absolutely. And that's what brings him to Memphis in the spring of '98. He's there to support striking sanitation work.
The garbage collector. It's April 3rd. He gives what will be his final speech.
The "I've been to the mountaintop" speech. It's haunting to listen to it now. He sounds so tired. But he ends with this prophetic vision. He says, I may not get there. It's almost like he knew.
The next day, April 4th, 1968, he's at the Lorraine Motel.
He steps out onto the balcony. A single shot rings out. James Earl Ray. It hits King in the neck. He's pronounced dead an hour later.
And the country just explodes.
Riots in over 100 cities, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Chicago. It looked like the race war that everyone had feared was final.
But the source points out this one remarkable exception in Indianapolis.
Yeah. Robert Kennedy was there campaigning for president. The police told him not to go into the black neighborhood, that they couldn't protect him. He went anyway.
He stood on the back of a truck.
And he broke the news to the crowd himself. And he didn't give a political. He talked about his own brother being killed by a white man. He quoted the Greek poet Aeschylus on suffering and wisdom. He pleaded for peace. And while the rest of the country burned, Indianapolis did not riot.
It's an incredible moment of grace in the middle of all that chaos.
It really was.
So as we wrap this up, you look at the legacy, the national holiday, the monument in D.C., but when you really look at the man, the stress, the fear, the constant threat of death, the internal doubts.
It makes what he accomplished that much more astounding. He wasn't some kind of demigod. He was a human being who felt fear and anger just like anyone else, but who disciplined himself to follow this incredibly difficult path. He used nonviolence to force a country to look in the mirror and face its own ugliness.
You have to wonder, right? If he hadn't had that discipline, if the movement had turned to violence early on, would any of this have been achieved?
It's the great question. And I think where the source material leaves us is with a challenge. King's vision at the end of his life was about more than just civil rights. It was about economic justice.
The Poor People's Campaign.
Yeah.
The unfinished business.
Exactly. We passed the Civil Rights Act, we passed the Voting Rights Act, but the fight against poverty, the fight for economic equality that he was just beginning, that's still very much with us.
So the question for us, I guess, is whether that vision of a beloved community is still just a distant dream, or if we've truly internalized the lesson he tried to teach us.
A question we all have to answer for ourselves.
Well, that's our deep dive into the strategy and life of Martin Luther King Jr. Thanks so much for listening.
Thank you.